For too long, domestic violence has been an invisible epidemic, hidden behind closed doors, misunderstood, and too often dismissed. At the S.E.E.N Summit, we believe every story deserves to be heard, every survivor deserves to be believed, and every person has the power to make a difference. Together, we are disarming domestic violence by shining a light on what's been unseen. With each episode, we are building awareness, deepening understanding, and creating space for healing and change. This is the S.E.E.N Summit Podcast, making the invisible visible, one conversation at a time. Good morning, Amy, and welcome to the S.E.E.N Summit Podcast. Thank you for being here at Before the Sun Came Up.
You're very welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, for everybody who's listening, I have got Amy Marlow-MaCoy. She is a licensed professional counselor and the author of the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook, Healing from Emotional Abuse, which, by the way, I highly recommend. I've been through that book a couple of times, and it's an absolute game changer. So anybody on that healing journey, you can get that on Amazon. Amy dedicates her practice to helping adult children of narcissists feel more confident, develop healthier relationships, and speak their truth without shame. And today she's here to share with us all about what some of these words that we hear really mean. Things like gaslighting, narcissism, trauma. And she knows so much about those categories. And I'm so excited to unpack them a little bit with you, Amy. Thank you.
I'm excited to dig in, and these are meaty topics.
Yeah. So let's pick one of the big buzzwords that's around right now. What is gaslighting, and what can we do to sort of combat that or prepare ourselves or notice that if that's happening?
Yeah, so I'll start with the definition. Gaslighting is a specific form of emotional abuse where one person is trying to undermine the confidence, the certainty, the mentality, judgment, perception, make somebody really question their experience so that they are full of doubt and less likely to challenge or push back against the gaslighter. So the gaslighter is out to undermine what you think you know about the world and replace it with what they want you to believe about the world.
So I'm hearing that gaslighting, it's not even just actions themselves, but it's the intention behind those actions.
Yes. Excuse me. Yes. Sometimes people have a hard time differentiating when, let's say, you and your friend remember a situation differently, and you may both be absolutely certain that you remember how it went down. And you're trying to get the other one on board with, no, this is what happened. It was the red car that ran into the blue one. You keep saying it's the blue one that ran into the red car, and that was not how it happened. And there's a difference between genuinely remembering things differently and being invested in changing someone else's perspective for your own benefit. So gaslighting would be, no, I don't know why you would even think that the red car hit the blue one. What's the matter with you? Are you sure you're okay? Like, should we get you checked out? Because I don't know how you could have taken that away from this incident. You're worrying me. I'm starting to question your judgment. And there's this undertone of, I'm going to make you doubt yourself. I'm going to make you question yourself. I'm going to make you think you can't trust your own judgment because I gain power from that, as opposed to two people who just genuinely have different memories of a situation, which is like everybody has their own perspective. We all have our own way of interpreting situations. So yes, it's not so much about the difference as it is about what is the intent behind how we handle the differences.
And the power that you're talking about that someone would gain from gaslighting, that's the power of having the person who is being gaslit then feel dependent on the gaslighter.
Yes, because if you have come to believe, or if you are starting to think that you can't trust yourself, that your memories, your judgments, your interpretations of something are so flawed that they're always wrong, then you're probably going to look to somebody outside of yourself to either validate or kind of check your perceptions against. And oftentimes, the people who are gaslighting us are the people who are most close to us. So, yes, gaslighting can come from anywhere, including out in the larger community. But the ones that have the most power to gaslight us are typically those in our closest relationships. So, family members, close friends, um, religious leaders or community leaders, partners. So, if they can get you to question yourself and present themselves as this sort of authority or a reality check, then ultimately you will start to trust them to give you the sense of what reality is at the expense of your own sense of reality.
And what does that do for some of our healthy systems that should be in place to combat that, like our sense of danger? Does our sense of danger um, sort of start to get worn away in that process? Or do people's senses of danger still perk up really well with gaslighting?
So they may still perk up. You may still have parts that raise a red flag and say there's something not right here. But what will often happen is that another part will then pop up and say, yeah, but you can't trust yourself. You are always thinking something is wrong. You are always overreacting. You're always being too sensitive, remember? So we can't trust our own danger sense because it's obviously, giving off these false positives or it's obviously overreacting. So let's assume that we're wrong from the get-go. And over time, that can lead to that sense of danger getting silenced to the point where you may not even notice you're in something that's abusive or harmful because you're so used to shutting down your own reactions to abuse. And so that can lead to continued cycles of abuse because now you can't even fight for yourself.
Yeah, and so that dialogue that you're referring to where it's like, "Yeah, obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll go check it. I'll go do a touchback. Hey, so and so, that's how I was feeling. That can't even be right. I shouldn't have brought it up." That's all, dialogue that's being fed in by the gaslighter, and then does it almost become internalized, like they don't have to do it for the person anymore at some point?
Absolutely. I call it internalized gaslighting when you become so accustomed to telling yourself that you're wrong, believing what the gaslighter is telling you, that you have parts that will start to do it automatically, like by reflex. So you have a thought that is in disagreement with your gaslighter, and you're like, wait, that's not how it happened, or that's not how I remember it. Oh, I must be overreacting again. I'm probably being too sensitive. I'm not even going to bring it up because I'm always going off half cocked, and I always end up finding out that I'm wrong. I'm let me just see how things happen because I'm usually wrong. So I probably am now too. And
And
sometimes that means they will just stay in a bad situation a really long time because they don't believe themselves when their warning signs are going off. And they've really taken that self-doubt to heart and it starts to override anything that might warn them or give them a chance to get out.
and does it actually have anything to do with intellect, Amy? Somebody who's falling for gaslighting,
No.
does that actually have
No.
anything to do with intellect?
No, it's not a measure of being smart enough or not smart enough. It is it's a personality thing. Someone who maybe has a really confident, dominant personality that can chip away at your confidence. And sometimes people who are going to gaslight are drawn to people with high intellect and high confidence because they get pleasure or they get a sense of accomplishment in breaking you down. And so, it's not a reflection of anything that's a deficit in you if you are being gaslit. It's that some people are very good at manipulating and some people get a sense of personal power from manipulating others. And if they don't find it anywhere else, that's what they're going to do. They're going to go to what they can reliably get that power from.
I'm so excited that I get to pick your brain this morning. Thank you so much for doing this. Okay, so what are I guess I have like two sides of this question. What are some um possible prophylactic measures to recognizing what something like that would be in a relationship without moving into like a hyper vigilant state and asking, is everyone I'm talking to gaslighting me? And then also, if you've been through that process, you have so much in your book and just that you've shared over time. But what can we do to start regaining senses of self and reality if we've been through that process?
Okay. So it's important to kind of develop some insight and self awareness so that you can recognize what are my internal patterns of communication. So, when I'm engaging with a friend, with a partner, with a family member, what's my internal dialogue when I talk with them? Am I going in with them feeling kind of defeated already or feeling like, oh, I always, I'm so sensitive around this person. I need to like check myself. Are you going in feeling on guard? Are you going in feeling less confident than you do in other situations? So, kind of recognizing what are your internal parts of yourself reacting to before you even walk in the door. That can sometimes tell you if there is something a little bit off in the relationship that you've developed this instinctive warning system that you don't normally listen to. You can also look at what are the patterns of how a conversation goes when you don't agree on something. So, if we go back to the red car, blue car example, there's a car accident, one car hits another, but you can't agree on which car hit which. Does the other person accept your perspective, even if they differ, or are they invested in changing your perspective? So if you can just agree, like, wow, I am absolutely sure that I saw the red car hit the blue car, and you're absolutely sure you saw the blue car hit the red car. Isn't that wild that we have such different experiences of this? If the other person is able to say, yeah, it is, isn't that crazy? Then that's not gaslighting. That's you have two different perspectives on something. If they say, no, you are wrong, I don't know how you could draw that conclusion from this, then that's something to be concerned about because not only is it just the disagreement of perspective, now it's getting into a bit of a character attack. And healthy disagreement should not involve character assault. There are also certain patterns that you can look for or learn to recognize, like the one I talk about probably most often when I do trainings or in the book is DARVO. And that's an acronym. It's DARVO, which stands for deny, accuse or attack, and reverse victim and offender. So if you look through your history with a person of, disagreements or conflicts, and you look at what is the pattern of how these things go. If you notice a pattern that goes something like, let's say you bring up with somebody, hey, I really didn't feel comfortable with those jokes you were making at my expense in front of your friends. They made me the butt of the joke and I did not appreciate that. Could you please stop? And their response is immediately to deny that they did anything wrong. That's not how it was. I wasn't making jokes about you. And then they go on the attack or accuse you of something. You are so sensitive. Why do you take everything to be about you? You are not the center of the universe. And then they reverse the victim and offender. You're coming at me. I can't even make a joke anymore. You are so controlling. Now they've turned it from you going to them saying you hurt me with this to now you are the one attacking them. You are the one wronging them. You are the one controlling them. And now you're on the back foot going, I'm just saying I don't really like it when you make fat jokes about me in front of people. But suddenly now you are on the defensive and you have to apologize for something that isn't actually a wrong. But they've turned the script around on you. And so if that is a dynamic that you find happening often in your relationships, That's a big warning sign. And that's a place that I would say you really want to look more closely at the dynamics in that relationship, because being unable to like take accountability for your actions and turning the blame onto another person is a classic in gaslighting and in abusive relationships as a whole.
And then what about for if someone then has reached the other side and they're now in the next part of life where they're going to be looking for these types of things, but then they've already been through it. So what about regaining their sense of self or their sense of reality after having been through that process?
So there's both an internal thing that's really important and an external thing that's really important. The internal thing is regaining your trust in yourself. So all of those instincts that you have learned to suppress or push down, you have to learn to listen to again, because I guarantee there were parts of you at some point that were saying something is not right here. Something doesn't feel right. I don't like this. I came in asking somebody not to make fat jokes, and now they are turning it around and saying that I'm being abusive and controlling. There's something wrong here. When you've learned to suppress that voice, that makes you more susceptible to continued gaslighting. So if you want to change that, you need to start listening to what you've learned to suppress again. So giving space to those parts of you that can recognize when something isn't right. And instead of suppressing them, getting really curious about them. Oh, there's I'm hearing this person talk and it seems like kind of the normal thing, but there's a part of me that's really not liking it. Like, I wonder what it is about this that feels so uncomfortable. And if you can stay with the curiosity for a while, you might start to hear, like, oh, wait a minute. This is the way that my ex used to talk when they would, gaslight me and tell me that I'm wrong about everything. It sounds so familiar. That's why it sounds so familiar. I've been through this before. And when you can trust yourself more and really like believe your own senses, your own perceptions, your own judgments, your memories, then you have a little more confidence to stand up for yourself or to say, that's not how I remember it. We have a different experience there, to set some boundaries or to walk away. Um, on the outside, it is so important to have really good, healthy supports around you. Like, you don't heal in a vacuum. And sometimes we get way too caught up in individualism and, healing is your journey, but nobody
Bootstraps.
makes a journey alone. Bootstraps. Yes, the bootstraps. BS. I wish I could throw that out. It has hurt everybody who has ever heard it, whether you're a white person that's been taught that from birth, a person of color who's been taught that they can't acknowledge the trauma of the past and American history to be part of the story of why they struggle. Anybody who's ever been given this bootstraps crap has been hurt by it. Like, it really doesn't help anyone. And we can take it to an extreme where we sometimes get so caught up in, I have to do this myself. I have to stand on my own 2 feet, that we deny ourselves a needed source of support in like friends, healthy family members, a religious community, if you have a supportive religious community, a community support group. If you go to like a therapy group or you go to a peer group, there are places outside of ourselves that we can get some needed validation, perspective, and support. And there's nothing wrong or weak about seeking outside support, especially when your sense of being able to trust yourself has been damaged.
Yes, and I think I wanna talk about what the difference between seeking healthy support and falling back into designed dependence can look like. Because in my
Mhm.
real job, I get the pleasure of interacting with some incredibly strong women who are walking through cancer. And one of the big words
Mhm.
in my world is recurrence. And so, can you talk a little bit about that?
Mhm.
What does seeking healthy support look like? And what does falling back into some patterns of designed or forced dependence look like? And is there a big chance of recurrence for people who walk through abuse?
There is, because sustained abuse, tends to warp our ways of responding to situations because of that tendency to, like with gaslighting, to start doubting yourself and to mistrust your own perspective, to mistrust your instinctive responses to something. When you suppress that, it makes you very vulnerable to other abusive people because you've already learned to shut down your early warning system. So, yes, there's absolutely a high risk of recurrence. Um, and it can sometimes be tricky to figure out where is the line between getting healthy support and validation from somebody on the outside and becoming overly dependent on other people's perspective because you still don't trust your own. And it may be that you start more on that end and work your way back to the independence because nobody is going to go straight out of an abusive relationship and be like, okay, now I can totally be self confident. Like you work your way there by degrees. And I have a lot of clients who come in and, they'll ask me, is it wrong for me to feel this way? Like, am I nuts to believe this? Am I reading too much into it? Am I, being absurd to think this? And I'm not in their shoes. I'm not walking through their daily life. I'm getting their report of something, but I can't tell them 100% like, yes, this is the correct emotional response. What I can do is remind them that there are no right or wrong feelings. Like emotions aren't right or wrong. How you choose to handle your emotions can be more or less helpful for you. But there's no right or wrong way to feel about something. And some of the healing work is just getting that to feel true, being able to believe that emotions are not value based and that you don't have to find the correct one because there are no incorrect ones. You feel how you feel. And being able to tolerate somebody disagreeing. So, building up your tolerance for somebody not liking what you have to say. That might mean looking at, what is it that makes disagreement or um, conflict feel so bad for you? What is it about a difference in perspectives that makes you so distraught or distressed that you will like sublimate your own experience to let somebody else be right? What would be really awful for you if you were to stick to your guns and say, no, that's not how it happened for me. That's not my experience. Because a lot of times it's not just about what's happening now, but it's about what has led up to this place. And a lot of the healing work is about learning to recognize the steps that got you here and be more conscious of when they're happening or being repeated on the outside. So, when it comes to developing that independence of thought again and being able to kind of reassure yourself, you may have to start with the people that you know love you and have your best interest at heart, truly have your best interest at heart. The best friend that you've known since you were 5 that has always hated that boyfriend anyway because she saw what was happening and she didn't like it. That might be the person that you lean on the most in the beginning to say, "Hey, I'm feeling a little bit hinky about this situation. Do you think I'm reading too much into it?" And maybe in the beginning, you really rely on her telling you, "No, you're right. This sounds a lot like your ex." And I would feel the same way. And then over time, as you kind of get back in touch with your own self-confidence and your own assertiveness, you won't need that reassurance as much because you'll be able to check in with yourself and say, this person just told me that I'm overly sensitive because I didn't like them using a slur in front of me. That's not overly sensitive. That's just being a decent person. they're I'm not going to listen to them. But sometimes you have to start by relying on somebody else for a while as you rebuild your confidence.
I I think one way that I can describe, like, the experience of gaslighting is sort of like being in an echo chamber. And so if somebody is with you in, like, a really cavernous and echoey place, and they are just starting with one thought, that thought starts to echo around, and then they put in another one right afterwards, and that one's echoing around with the other one, and they just keep adding the layers and layers and layers and layers, and it gets really, really noisy. So by the time you try to add your
Mhm,
voice to that, it's almost more intimidating. And then if someone else is trying to, from the outside, shout into that echo chamber, "He's doing this to you." It's really, really hard to start hearing that. So what, if
mhm.
any, strategies for the person who is looking into the cavern, not liking what they see for you, and wants to get a way to cut through that noise? Is there a strategy for that? Are there any ways that you've seen where people who really want to help and actually offer support can do that?
It is so hard to be a loved one on the outside. I just wanted to start by saying that it's really hard to watch something happening and not be able to just pull somebody out of it. Um, when you see somebody who is being gaslit, who's being taken advantage of and manipulated, the temptation is to run in, both guns blazing, like, they are lying to you, they are manipulating you, they're taking advantage of you. And I would caution against that for a couple of reasons. One is, like you said, there's already a lot of noise. And if you come in yelling, you are more likely to have them just go like this than you are for them to listen because it's overwhelming. And the second is because if you position yourself as openly antagonistic to that gaslighter, that gives the gaslighter ammunition to say, like, they're trying to ruin our relationship. She's just trying to interfere. She's telling you that this is abusive. You don't think it's abusive. You're still here. So why would you listen to her? And you can get yourself positioned as hostile in a way that, leads even your dear friend to kind of distance themselves from you. Because not only have they been getting, fed this insinuation that you are out to hurt their relationship, but also, like, as a means of self-preservation, because the more time they spend around you, the more agitated their gaslighter may be if you are in opposition to them. And so it is easier on the victim if they can cut out one source of stress. So they may distance themselves from the people who could help. So sometimes that means you have to take a more kind of quiet or subtle approach. Sometimes it's just letting the person keep coming to you until they start to question. Sometimes it means when they come to you and they're saying, I just don't understand why he or she would say this, and I don't know why they would do that. It just feels like when we argue, it goes in circles, and somehow I always end up feeling awful. Maybe then a helpful thing to do would be to say, how did you feel about the situation? Like, I already heard how your partner felt. You told me how they felt. What about you? Like, what's your take? And you don't have to point out that they're different. You don't have to point out that, the ex is wrong or whatever. You can just make space for your loved one to have their own opinions again, even if it's only with you in this context for a little bit. But you're saying your opinions matter when they've been told repeatedly by this other person in so many words that their opinions are trash. And you're saying, I value what you have to say. I value your perspective. Your perspective is important. And then let them, like, they can draw their own conclusions. They can make their own connections between, like, oh, I do feel like this is messed up, or I don't like what's happening here. Whether or not they use that to go back and confront the person, You are just making the space for them to get out of the echo chamber, to quiet some of the background noise a little bit so that they could hear themselves think and then
Yeah.
notice, like, what are my thoughts? Am I feeling overwhelmed, taken advantage of, talked over, always wrong? Did I feel this way before I started dating this person? They can start to question things when they can hear themselves a little better.
Amy, that's beautiful to allow space for quietness and to hear their own thoughts. That's beautiful. Um, I have been picking your brain for almost this entire time about only my first buzzword that I wanted to get through. And you focus on narcissism, and I haven't even gotten to that one yet. Amy, what is an actual narcissist?
So that is a layered question because we have a diagnosis in the DSM of narcissistic personality disorder. And there are 9 different criteria that you have to meet at least 5 of to be considered diagnosable with NPD. However, socially, we also use the word narcissist and narcissism a little bit differently, a little more broadly than the DSM.
Like in a Coldplay song.
And yeah, we, I'm very excited that the research that is coming out recently is really advocating for a broader definition of narcissism within the DSM because there are pieces that we're missing in the way that it's defined there. But without getting into like a whole other piece about that, generally speaking, a narcissist is going to be a person who has a sustained pattern of relationship dynamics where they are they are the most important person in the room. They feel that they are entitled to special treatment, that they are better, higher than, or more important than everyone around them, or that they deserve to only associate with the most important, the most special, the most socially valuable people, and that they will take advantage of, manipulate, and use people around them to prop up that internal sense of self importance. So they may be very grandiose and very kind of self aggrandizing. The person who comes out and says, "Of course, I won the golf tournament. I'm the best golfer there ever was," whether there's any merit to that or not. They may be someone who is more subtle or covert and who draws all of the attention and the sympathy in the room by always having an anxiety attack whenever you disagree with them. Or, you say, Mom, we're going to have Christmas somewhere else. And mom suddenly has chest pain. And, now you feel guilty and you have to have Christmas with her because otherwise she'll have chest pain. And chest pain is really, I don't like that you did something I don't like.
Dang it,
Um,
Amy, that was my plan when my son gets married one day.
I know. I'm sorry. I totally spoiled it. You'll forget by then. It's okay. Just don't let him listen to this one. Um, and there's also a marked lack of empathy and lack of insight. So, a highly narcissistic person is not going to really consider the people around them. It's like a real blind spot. They don't think about how this will affect you. They may not be able to consider how this would affect you. It doesn't sort of exist in their thought process. And they tend to really lack any insight or self-awareness to notice like, I always want to be the most important person in the room. I don't like being around someone who's smarter than me. I have to pull them down if I think that they're smarter than me. I have to chip them down to size, or I need to ride their coattails and get whatever glory I can by association. They don't recognize that. So if you try to call them out on it, you're going to get a big fight because they don't believe they're doing anything wrong. They don't believe they're causing any pain, and they think they're being unfairly targeted just for being smart, important, special. You're jealous of me, all that crap.
And so we've all met one, right? That's
Hmm.
probably that's that's probably true. But what's the difference between somebody who's just really confident and kind of goes through life without much regard for um, other people, maybe just isn't very caring, and like somebody who is truly within like the personality disorder realm.
So when I do trainings for other therapists, I teach that narcissism exists on a like a spectrum or a continuum of severity. So at end, you have people who are maybe just a little bit self-absorbed, a little bit cocky, a little bit um, thoughtless about other people, or a little over vain about their own abilities. And at the other end, you've got people who are so uh, self-important and so other denying that they don't even see people as people. They see them as pawns or tools or things to move around, and would actually start to cross over into the realm of sociopathy. So your serial killers, most serial killers, and people with antisocial personality disorder would also meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but not all narcissists would be serial killers or antisocial personality disorder. So someone who is a little maybe overconfident, but not truly narcissistic, the difference would probably lie in how they treat other people. So do you see other people's intellect, talent, personality, charisma, success, fame, wealth, achievements? Are those a threat to you? Or is it something that you can also be like, oh, good job, and genuinely like not be bothered if somebody else has those things? If you see them as a threat and you need to knock the other person down, or you need to try to like absorb them and take them for yourself, or gain benefit from the other person having them, that's more on the narcissistic side. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking to myself, um, it's probably really difficult unless you're Amy Marlow-MaCoy and you specialize in narcissistic personality disorder, to spot a narcissist, right? Because some of the dialogues that you've touched on, where it's like it can even present as gaining that sense of importance through maybe like really convincing stories that would evoke someone's empathy. Is it difficult for therapists in general to be able to spot a narcissistic dynamic if that's not something that they've specialized in?
So part of the difficulty is that a lot of times the narcissistic individual is not coming in to see the therapist. The people that they hurt are. So you're getting information third hand. And some therapists are very hesitant to name something without having actually like seen the person themselves. So they don't want to rush to diagnosing or labeling something inappropriately, which is ethical and important to be aware of. Um, and it's why I don't diagnose people with NPD. Like if I haven't met the narcissist, I haven't done an assessment, I haven't done multiple sessions with them, I'm not saying they meet those criteria. I will use descriptors like narcissistic behaviors, narcissistic personality traits, because you can see those when a person describes these repeated incidents and dynamic cycles that they go through with, their narcissistic individual. Like if this happens over and over and over and over and over, I think it's fair to say this person has a lot of narcissistic traits. Am I going to call them NPD? No. But am I going to say these behaviors, these patterns, these cycles are things that we associate with people who are higher in narcissistic traits? Does that match your experience of this person? Because I do think it's also really important to victims of narcissistic abuse to have a name for something, to be able to say, yes, this thing that's happening to you is real. There's a name for it. You're not imagining it all. You're not being too sensitive. This is a real thing, because part of narcissistic abuse is the gaslighting of saying, you're making this up, you're imagining it, you're overreacting, you're being too sensitive. So, part of establishing trust is being able to say, I hear you and I believe you. And there's a name for this. It's a real phenomenon that you have not made up in your own little head that we can talk about, we can take apart and kind of look at all the pieces of it.
That's so helpful. It's so helpful to hear. It sounds like I've actually kind of heard some like counterpoints that we can look for. So if a person who is having these narcissistic tendencies can't often express empathy or engage in empathy, it's almost the absence of empathy would be a good thing to check in on. What are some other ones?
So one thing that I put in the book is that essentially if you don't really know how to identify if a relationship is healthy or not, but you know this type of relationship is unhealthy, you can sort of reverse engineer what a healthier relationship would look like. So if you've got somebody that you're like, this person never empathizes with what I'm saying, I'm always wrong, I'm always ridiculous for thinking that, or, it's always I need to examine myself, but they're never willing to examine themselves, then you might look at other relationships in your life and say, is my other parent, is my sibling, is my friend, is my, mentor, somebody that if I raise an issue with them, are they willing to say, let me sit with that for a minute? I hadn't considered that. I didn't intend that, but I recognized that that had an impact. Maybe I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but I realized that that did hurt your feelings. And I'm sorry for that. Can they take accountability? Are they able to acknowledge their role in something? Are they able to be not the most important person in the room? So when you look for sort of the opposite of some of those traits, you can start to figure out what a healthier relationship might look like. So, comparing the narcissistic relationship with other relationships in your life can sometimes be helpful just to look and see, how much of what I am used to in this relationship is something that I feel good about, and how much is something that I'm uncomfortable with or questioning or saying, this doesn't happen in my other relationships. And like give yourself permission to feel where it doesn't feel good.
I was just thinking to myself as you're saying that, and and we're talking about skills that go across life, right? Schools skills like being able to take accountability, skills like being able to, as much as possible, try to explore another person's perspective. Um, and the thing about skills is some people can fake those skills. And so, do you find that
Mhm.
you also have to be able to check back in with whether or not something has resonated as truthful or performative? Because I can hear two versions of a statement in my head. I can hear a version that says, I see that you're really upset right now. And what I'm hearing is that that's because of something that I said. I want to explore that and find out what it is that I can do differently to make that not happen. And then I can also hear the same thing being said. I can see that you're really upset right now. I hear you. You think it's my fault.
Mhm.
It's just all about something I need to change. I'm sorry. So sorry. Is that a common dynamic?
Yeah. Yeah, I do see that, where sometimes people can say the right words, but you can feel that the energy behind them is not authentic. And part of what makes this whole thing so complicated is that a lot of it is nuance, a lot of it is felt, a lot of it is hard to pinpoint, especially in the moment. And sometimes you have to really like look back over a long period of time to recognize patterns, because it's not just about something that happens one time. It's not like an incident that's isolated, because everybody can have bad days where we are not our best self and we don't engage in an argument in the healthiest way. Like we can all do crappy things. But in an abusive relationship, you're looking at what is the long-term pattern and what is the long-term dynamic between us? Is it is there a equal balance of power? Do we each respect each other's opinions? Are we able to resolve conflict? Are we able to disagree with each other and still respect each other? That kind of thing. And when you can say the words, but the tone behind them is still implying, I'm indulging you because you're just being too much. This is still really a you problem, but I'll play your game. Fine. I'm wrong. Yes, that does happen. And it can make the person who's genuinely trying to resolve an issue feel about this big, because it implies that trying to solve this problem or trying to address it is the victim being overly picky, being pedantic, or being ridiculous, or having a request that is ridiculous, and that they're just being indulged like you would a child who's having a tantrum. Instead of, the first way that you said it was more respectful and saying with a more authentic openness, like, okay, I hear, that I did something that upset you, and I would love to know, like, how I can avoid that in the future. So I want to understand this better. And there's a huge difference between openly acknowledging, like, I don't know what I did wrong, but I recognize that something I did not land. And I would really like to have a healthier, better dynamic between us. So I want to address this versus I hear that you are being too sensitive. So you think I did everything wrong. Fine, we'll do it your way. Which is not respectful, and it's not taking them seriously, and it's not offering a genuine willingness to address a problem. Sometimes the examples I give tend to be pretty blatant because I want it to be really clear what's happening. But in real life, it's not always that blatant. Sometimes it's very subtle. Sometimes I've had people come through my office before that I may have gotten like a little bit of there's something about this person that's like twigging my radar in an intake. And then by the end of the first session, I'm like, they're a vulnerable narcissistic person. That's why. And I can hear from the end of the first session, like, oh, this person kind of got through my screening process. And I can now tell what kind of a relationship we're going to have. And I missed it in the beginning. Sometimes I have clients who, they can identify a narcissistic parent because there's one parent that's been really overt, very obviously the like bad guy of the story. And then when they start making changes, the other parent that they had seen as like their pillar, their security person, their the good parent, the good cop in the situation, all of a sudden when change starts happening in the relationship, that other parent turns on the kid, the adult child, and is like, why are you disrupting everything? And they turn out to have more of the covert traits, that they had gotten a lot of emotional energy from being seen as the good parent, from
Oh,
being
wow.
seen as the rescuer, being seen as the one that the child could go to, and disrupting that triangle does not please them. And so they may start putting pressure on the kid. No, go back to the way things were. But that wasn't visible until this change was introduced. And then you see, how do they respond to change? Oh, they want it to change back. They don't like it. It doesn't serve them anymore. So sometimes it is very subtle.
Wow. That's like that's a whole nother episode. Family dynamics.
It is. Yeah, and
Um,
it's sad when that happens. It's really hard.
yeah, I can only imagine. Um, okay. Are you ready for another buzzword?
Sure, fire away.
Amy, tell us, what is trauma?
So, trauma, when we're talking about like psychological trauma, is basically the what happens when we encounter an event or incident that leaves a mark on us that we're unable to integrate into sort of the flow of our history. So it's something that hurts us or harms us in such a way that we can't kind of put it in as just a thing that happened to us that may have been unpleasant, but that we can move on from. And it becomes a place where we sort of get stuck around what happened. And often that's because it's something that either threatens our sense of safety in the world, our sense of identity, our sense of connection, or our sense of control, like our feeling that we have any amount of control or that we have personal power. So, two people can experience the same thing, and one of them finds it traumatic and another one doesn't. And sometimes that's down to a certain amount of just innate temperament. And it also has to do with like, what is our environment like? And do we have support? Do we have people to help us process something? Are we able to have enough safety and calm to process it outside of the incident? And if not, then it can sort of become a sticky point in our brain where now this thing has happened that tells us we're not safe in some way and we can't let go of that belief. Like it becomes ingrained in us. And then future incidents that remind us in any way or feel even a little bit similar to that kind of latch on and it forms a chain. And each new incident is a link on the chain. And so it continues to reinforce that belief that we are unsafe or that, we don't know who we are is not good, or that we don't have any power in our lives, we can't change things, etc.
And so, what can various stages of that look like for someone who is on their healing journey? Like fresh trauma, what can small steps look like there?
So if someone is kind of fresh off the heels of a traumatic experience, they might notice things like difficulty settling. Let's say it was a bad car accident, and they got hurt, or they saw their life flash before their eyes. They thought they were going to die. Um, they might immediately afterward have a hard time sleeping, or they might have bad dreams about it. They may feel very jumpy when they drive by the intersection where it happened. Or if they see a car like the one that hit them, they may feel the same kind of like ugh, discomfort. They may have body reactions that they don't like even consciously connect to what happened, but their stomach will suddenly clench, or they'll get really tight and tense, or they'll have headaches. And it's not related specifically to being injured necessarily, but it is to the effect of this thing happened and I felt really unsafe. Um, they may also feel unwilling to, say, drive a car again. Like I'm too nervous, I'm too shaky, I don't feel right behind the wheel, or I don't want to drive yet. And then if they are unable to kind of process and move past it, down the road, they might find that, they stop wanting to drive ever again. They say, I'm gonna Uber or I'm gonna take the bus. I don't need to drive. I don't need to get a new car. I'm just gonna not do that. They might feel really nervous going through similar, if it happened on a bridge, they maybe don't want to drive over a bridge. If it happened making a left turn, maybe they get really tense whenever they're in the car and somebody makes a left turn. If they were hit by a semi, maybe every time they see a semi, they stop breathing for a second, um, or they get really nervous. And it could be that sometimes those reactions grow over time instead of getting less. So it might be they start having panic attacks in the car, or that they can't even get in a car anymore because they're too nervous. They're too scared of what's going to happen. They might have flashbacks where it feels like they're reliving that moment. Um, and if it does not get dealt with, then that may sort of extend to other areas where they may feel, you know, permanently unsafe. Like they're not safe in the car, they're not safe out of the car. They're always kind of watching for what's going to happen. And is somebody going to hurt them? Is something bad going to happen? They may not want other people around them to drive. Maybe they don't want their teenage son or daughter to get their learner's permit because they're so afraid that they're going to get in a car accident. So over time, if we don't deal with the trauma, it can start to kind of ripple outward and affect other areas of our life, so that that sense of lacking safety becomes a global thing instead of just situational to that moment when they weren't safe.
That makes a lot of sense. And then with abusive relationships, you've talked about like forming a chain through this trauma. And so usually there's some duration to that for someone who's experiencing abuse. So I imagine that chain gets quite long and can probably do some of the things that you're talking about, where it's no longer attached to situational stimulus and it can just sort of,
Mhm.
I'm picturing like brambles growing outward, like it just starts to extend.
Mhm.
Um, is the onset of trauma always something physical?
No, absolutely not. There is, in the trauma community, we sometimes differentiate, and I have really mixed feelings about this languaging, but what we would call a big T trauma and little t trauma. So big T would be like maybe the car example that I gave where your life was endangered in a car accident and you really were afraid you were going to die. That kind of incident where your life is genuinely threatened or you believe it is genuinely threatened, where the life of somebody close to you may be threatened, where there's a threat to your life or safety in other ways, like a break in at your house, armed robbery, something like that. That can be a big T trauma where your fundamental sense of being is altered. And that's sort of the sort of classic thing that we imagine when we talk about PTSD sometimes is, like an incident like that occurs and that changes the way we see the world afterward. Or like a soldier who goes to war and comes back with combat trauma because they've seen so many terrible things happen. They've participated in terrible things that have happened. They've seen their friends die. And they come back with this fundamentally altered sense of safety and reality. But the same thing can absolutely happen even when physical danger is not present, with what we might call smaller T traumas, where maybe your life is not physically endangered, but your sense of self, your sense of reality, your sense of connection is chipped away at over time, little bites out of it. And over an accumulated period of time, that trauma can build up to have the same or more impact than a single incident life threatening event. We call that complex PTSD, where it is an accumulation of repeated traumas over time, traumas that typically affect our sense of self, identity, how we see the world, that are not specifically linked to like a threat to life and limb of ourselves or someone else. And emotionally abusive, narcissistic abuse relationships absolutely fall into that category.
And because you devote your practice to helping people heal from this, I just want to ask for somebody who might need to hear it. With such a daunting and overwhelming, um, extending, outgrowing type of trauma, is there hope for people to heal from that?
Absolutely. No question. Absolutely. I, the privilege of working with the clients I do is that I get to witness miraculous things. People who have been so hurt for so long, who have believed the worst things about themselves for decades, that are able to set those beliefs down and say, I don't want to carry this anymore and let it go and walk out of the room with a new perspective on themselves. It's incredible the kind of changes, the kind of growth and healing that people can do with a little support, with a little encouragement. And I would, to anybody who's questioning whether or not they can heal from this or whether or not things can change for the better, 100%. Yet it takes time and you do need to be patient with yourself, but it's absolutely possible.
And for those loved ones, like you talked about, what a hard, hard position to be in, that there is hope that that loved one that you've watched in can get to safety, can get to healing. And I
Yeah.
know that we are running out of time, but words that people like to ask about would be words like cure. Can we cure it?
Mhm.
And is trauma something that we are looking to cure, or is trauma something that we are looking to gain some freedom from?
So the heartbreak of trauma is that it has written in our lives in Sharpie. So we're not gonna completely get rid of the effects of it. It's somewhat like having an autoimmune disease. Like, once you have it, you have it, and it may flare up at times, and it may go into remission at times. And that the thing that really sucks about PTSD is you don't really get rid of it. You learn to live with it, and you can greatly reduce the pain of it and the effect of it. You cannot erase what has happened. Like, it's always gonna be part of your story, but it doesn't have to be the defining characteristic of your story, and it does not have to direct how the rest of your story goes. It's just gonna be part of it.
I think I heard someone phrase it once as like, it will always be there. There will always be the scar there, but you'll be able to slap it and it won't hurt anymore at some point if you really go
Hmm.
through the healing process. Um, and
I
so
think
I
that's
think,
a good way to put it.
yeah. So I think sometimes what people are hoping for at the beginning of the journey might be something closer to like that cure picture. But there is a whole lot of beauty in getting to a point where you can touch that scar without it hurting so bad.
Yes.
Amy, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I just know that there's going to be someone that listens that needed to hear some of the things that they can identify and be validated in some of the experiences that they had, or some loved ones that are listening that now have some hope that that person will get to a place where they feel that sense of self again and feel that sense of autonomy. And so, thank you so much for giving voice to those things. And then to wrap up on a slightly lighter note, can you please tell me how in the very difficult and very necessary work that you do, how are you taking care of yourself?
I, um, I had surgery in December 2024, and while I was recovering from surgery, I discovered embroidery,
And
and I have not stopped embroidering since December 2024. So, one of my favorite little projects that has crossed over into the office is, the emotions wheel that you sometimes see people use? I embroidered one, and it sits in my office so that if a client is struggling with how to articulate an emotion, they have an option. So, embroidery has helped keep me off my phone when I'm doom scrolling and given me something that is really kind of fun and soothing and methodical and also has some practical utility.
that's phenomenal. Um, what a low key flex. And I made that emotions wheel. By the way, I made that. That's amazing, Amy. I love it. Um,
It's just fun, it's relaxing, and we need that in the world right now.
Thank you again so
Yeah.
much, Amy. And again, the book is the Gaslighting Recovery Workbook. That's Healing from Emotional Abuse by Amy Marlow-MaCoy. Just highly recommend. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for being a part of the S.E.E.N Summit, the movement to end domestic violence